Health Minister Greg Hunt wrote to Tennis Australia back in November, saying people must be fully vaccinated, as defined by ATAGI, to gain quarantine-free entry into Australia. He confirmed people who contracted COVID-19 within the past 6 months and have not received 2 doses are not considered fully vaccinated. Despite this, a Tennis Australia fact sheet reportedly sent to tour organisers on December 7 to share with players advises they may be eligible for an exemption from a recent infection. On December 30, Djokovic received a letter from Tennis Australia's own medical officials and reviewed by a Victorian government panel saying he had been deemed eligible for an exemption under ATAGI rules because he had recently recovered from the disease, after testing positive for COVID earlier that month on December 16. Djokovic's documents from a Serbian Public Health Institute show he was tested just after 1 p.m. that afternoon and had his results by 8:20 p.m. that same evening. Djokovic says he was not informed of his positive test before being pictured the very next day at the Novak Tennis Centre in Belgrade without a mask, posing for pictures with young fans. He does concede he knew the test result the day after that, before heading to a photo shoot with a French magazine. In court, Djokovic's lawyers pointed to ATAGI advice that says a confirmed COVID infection can warrant a temporary exemption from being vaccinated for up to 6 months. But the government noted the exemption paperwork says this kind of temporary pass can only follow an acute major medical illness, not merely a positive case. ATAGI advice also says you can get vaccinated as soon as you're better. Just after midnight on Thursday morning, Djokovic was sitting down with immigration officials for an interview at Melbourne Airport. In an agreed transcript of their conversation, Djokovic confirms he is not vaccinated for COVID-19. The court heard that around 5:20am, Djokovic was told he could have until 8:30am to provide a response to a notice his visa may be cancelled, giving him time to consult with his team. Instead, he was asked for his response at 6:14am, and the decision to cancel his visa made at 7:42am. The government eventually conceded in court this series of events made the cancellation unreasonable. But on the day, the PM was hailing a win for border security.
On the issue of Mr Djokovic, rules are rules. A visa is one issue, but you have to have a double vaccination, because that's the country's rule for entry into the country, and that is assessed at the border. It is on them to have the proof to show why they wouldn't have to be vaccinated. Now, he was unable to furnish that proof to the Border Force officers at the airport last night, and they're the rules.
The Immigration Minister, Alex Hawke, has spent a second day considering whether to use his powers to re-cancel Djokovic's visa. Border officials are understood to be looking into Djokovic's declaration that he had not travelled within 14 days of flying to Australia, which appears to be contradicted by social media posts indicating he was in Serbia on Christmas Day, then in Spain a few days later. Djokovic now says this was a case of human error when his support team filled in his form, and one they've today moved to correct. Earlier, I spoke to former Deputy Secretary of the Immigration Department, Abul Rizvi, and immigration lawyer Carina Ford. Carina Ford, the government doesn't seem to have a very good way out of this. Legally, what are the options open to the minister, and what would the fallout be from those various options?
The options for the minister are to do nothing and just leave it as the status quo, to use his personal power and cancel the visa. The ramifications of that is that it's very difficult to apply for judicial review to find an error in the process, and he is not bound to make a decision quickly either if he chooses to revoke it. The other is to consider the information and make a decision not to cancel it based on the information put forward by Djokovic, and find that it's not in the public interest to do so.
Abul Rizvi, when we last spoke, we were focused on whether authorities had treated Djokovic fairly in the system. But given what's now come out from public sources and from Djokovic himself about how he approached gaining entry to Australia, how much trouble do you think he's in?
Well, it would appear that the government has now sufficient information to proceed with cancellation. But that is not the end of the matter. In order to do the cancellation, that cancellation notice would need to be delivered by Australian Border Force to Mr Djokovic, wherever he is, in a hotel, on a tennis court or wherever it is. And that would most likely take place under the glare of the world's media. Having cancelled his visa, the Australian Border Force then needs to take him into detention. And it is quite possible that Mr Djokovic may still be in detention whilst the Australian Open is ongoing. That would really be a bad look.
So the government trapped by its own optics in a way.
Yes. It's a lesson that you don't make decisions such as this after people arrive in Australia. You make them when they apply for a visa.
Carina Ford, if the minister does decide to intervene and order his removal, does Djokovic still have options to appeal that decision? I mean, you've said that it's very difficult, but what would be the process that was involved?
With that power, the first step would be that he can actually apply to have the cancellation revoked, but he can only have it revoked if he can prove the ground does not exist. Now, that may be difficult if the minister goes to the point of cancelling. The issue with that too is the minister can sit on that decision, so he's not bound to make a decision quickly. And there's a number of cases where it's taken months and months and months to get a decision on that part. So it could just mean that the visa's cancelled with nothing moving forward. Now, I think the minister is very conscious that he needs to make a decision relatively quickly and may not do that given the media attention. But then if he chooses not to revoke the cancellation again, then he would have the option to go to judicial review. But it's much more difficult because of the provisions that natural justice doesn't apply. So it's quite different to the process that was set out in relation to the first cancellation.
Well, on that point, Abul Rizvi, you've said the minister should take his time and not rush this decision. He's been contemplating it now for a couple of days. Is there a point at which it risks dragging on for too long?
Yes, I think after a point it becomes unfair to Mr Djokovic and his preparations for the Australian Open. Now, I know that's not a legal consideration, but I think many people would view having the sword of Damocles hanging over Mr Djokovic in this way whilst he's playing in the Australian Open quite unfair.
Carina Ford, observations have been made that there were administrative errors made in the handling of another case that you're close to. The Sri Lankan family the government tried to deport from Biloela. The federal court found the way they were treated breached procedural fairness in one case. What's the difference?
There's not really, and in fact it's still sitting with the minister to consider. So this is what, and similar to some of the Park Hotel cases, similar to bar list for Afghans, there are many cases sitting in front of the minister at the minute for his consideration. And that's why there's a lot of media coverage about the fact that, you know, is this taking up a lot of time when there's so many cases that also need to be considered by the minister.
Abul Rizvi, we've now cancelled the visa of another tennis player, Renata Varakova, who was already in the country and attending events. She'd been relying on a medical exemption from vaccination too. Does that look like a face-saving exercise to you?
I think it was about correcting the count. Effectively, the government changed policy. On the 5th of January, the policy was that the government, as the Prime Minister outlined, the government accepted it at face value, the medical exemptions provided by state governments. And that's what happened to the Czech player. But afterwards, when they cancelled Mr Djokovic's visa, they had to go back and retrospectively look at all the cases where they had accepted the medical exemptions at face value and correct what they had done earlier. That's what you get when you change policy on the run.
Abul Rizvi and Carina Ford, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.